Burden of Proof. Chapter 1. The Briefcase. Lucas Donovan sat in his corner office on the 32nd floor of the Stanton and Bryce building, overlooking the sprawling city beneath him. The evening lights twinkled like stars on a clear night, casting long shadows over the bustling streets. He wasn't paying attention to the view. His focus was on the thick envelope that had just been slid across his desk. It was unmarked, save for a single word written on the front: urgent. Lucas, a seasoned attorney known for taking on complex corporate cases, felt an uneasy chill creep down his spine. He had been expecting routine documents for an upcoming case, but this envelope was different, carried an air of danger. "Who delivered this?" he asked his secretary, Marlene, who stood at the doorway. "A courier. No return address. Said it was important." Lucas nodded, dismissing her. He waited for the door to close before he carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single flash drive and a handwritten note. "Everything you need to bring them down is on this drive. Be careful. This is bigger than you think." The handwriting was hurried, as if the writer had little time. Lucas frowned. Who would send him this? And more importantly, what exactly was on that flash drive? Plugging the drive into his laptop, Lucas's heart pounded. The screen blinked to life with a series of encrypted files. His stomach tightened when he saw the name at the top of one file: Gale Industries, Confidential. Gale Industries was one of the largest conglomerates in the country, with ties to politicians, judges, and anyone who had power. Lucas had brushed shoulders with their attorneys in court many times, but never had he imagined being handed evidence that could topple the entire empire. Clicking on the first document, Lucas saw transaction records, offshore accounts, and a trail of illegal activity that spanned years. It was a smoking gun, a collection of damning evidence so thorough it could ruin Gale Industries for good. Suddenly, his phone rang, shattering the silence in his office. The caller ID was blocked. Lucas hesitated, then answered. "This is Donovan." A distorted voice came through. "You shouldn't have opened it." The line went dead. Lucas's pulse raced. Whoever had sent him the flash drive wasn't the only one who knew he had it. He stared at the screen, the weight of the information sinking in. He had stumbled onto something dangerous, something that could not only bring down Gale Industries but might also endanger his life. He closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair, the quiet hum of the city now feeling ominous. How deep did this conspiracy run? And who could he trust? There was no going back. He had to decide whether to pursue this, knowing the risks. And if he did, how far he was willing to go to see justice served. The stakes had never been higher. How would you react in Lucas's shoes? If you're eager to find out how he navigates this dangerous path, subscribe and stay tuned for the next chapter. Chapter 2. The Threat. The next morning, Lucas couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that had taken root in his mind. The city buzzed as usual, but everything seemed off, sharper, more vivid, like the world was watching him. Paranoia had seeped into his thoughts, and he knew he had reason to be cautious. As he approached his office, something caught his eye. A black sedan, sleek and tinted, was parked across the street. Its windows were up, but he felt the gaze of whoever was inside boring into him. He quickened his pace. When he entered the Stanton and Bryce building, Marlene greeted him with a worried expression. "Mr. Donovan, someone dropped this off for you this morning." She handed him a small envelope, similar to the one from the night before. No courier this time, just left at the front desk. Lucas took it with a sinking feeling. Once in his office, he carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. It showed him leaving his house that morning, followed by a single word written on the back: "Stop." His hands shook as he stared at the photo. This wasn't just a warning, it was a message. They were watching him, every move he made. His mind raced. He needed to act fast, but he couldn't do it alone. He had a few trusted allies, but could he really trust anyone now? This kind of power corrupted, and it was clear that the people behind Gale Industries had long arms and deep pockets. Just as he was about to make a call, the door to his office swung open. It was Gerald Kane, his mentor and senior partner at the firm. "Lucas, we need to talk," Gerald said, his voice unusually tense. Lucas motioned for him to come in. "What's going on?" Gerald closed the door and walked over to the desk, lowering his voice. "I've been hearing things, rumors, whispers in high places. Gale Industries is in trouble, and it's not just legal. They're desperate. People are starting to disappear, and I need to know, Lucas, are you involved in any of this?" Lucas's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about? Don't play dumb. This is dangerous, Lucas. If you're mixed up in whatever's happening with Gale Industries, you need to back off now. I'm telling you as a friend." Gerald's eyes were sharp, filled with concern, and something else, fear. Lucas knew he couldn't reveal the flash drive or the photo. Not yet. Not until he figured out who was really on his side. "I appreciate the warning, Gerald," Lucas said carefully, "but I'm not involved in anything shady." Gerald gave him a long look, then nodded. "Just be careful. This isn't something you want to get caught up in. I've seen careers and lives ruined over less." As Gerald left the office, Lucas exhaled slowly. The pressure was mounting. He needed to make a move, but one wrong step could cost him everything. The only question was, who would strike first? Is Lucas in over his head? To see how deep this conspiracy goes, subscribe and share to follow this suspenseful journey. Chapter 3. Unlikely Ally. Lucas spent the rest of the day pacing his office, his mind racing through every possible scenario. He knew he needed help, but anyone tied to the firm or the legal community could be compromised. The walls were closing in, and he felt it with every breath. His phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but this time he didn't hesitate. "Lucas Donovan," he answered sharply. "Meet me at the corner of 5th and Lexington in 20 minutes. Don't be late, and don't bring anyone." The voice was female, firm, and unfamiliar. "Who is this?" Lucas asked, but the line clicked dead. Another warning, or a lead? Lucas checked his watch. 20 minutes wasn't much time. Grabbing his coat, he made his way out of the building, carefully checking for any sign of the black sedan. It was gone, but he wasn't foolish enough to believe he wasn't being watched. The chill in the autumn air bit at his face as he reached 5th and Lexington. The area was bustling with pedestrians, but no one seemed out of place. He stood by the corner, scanning the crowd, searching for whoever had made the call. A woman in a dark trench coat approached. Her head was covered by a scarf, her face partly obscured by large sunglasses. She looked around before speaking. "Mr. Donovan," she said, her voice low but urgent. "Walk with me." Lucas hesitated but fell into step beside her. "You called me. Who are you?" "Someone who knows what you're dealing with. Gale Industries. They're not just corrupt. They control more than you realize. The files you have, they'll kill to keep those secrets buried." "How do you know about the files?" Lucas asked, his eyes narrowing. She glanced at him, her lips tight. "I work for them, or rather, I used to, until I found out what they were really involved in." Lucas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold wind. "And why should I trust you?" The woman smirked bitterly. "You can't. But if you don't, you're going to end up like the others, silenced." Lucas stopped walking and turned to face her. "What do you want?" "I can help you," she said quietly. "I have access to information, more than what's on that flash drive. But I need protection. Once they know I've talked, I'm dead." Lucas studied her for a long moment. He could sense her fear, but there was also something else. Desperation. He was running out of options, and if she was telling the truth, this could be the break he needed. "All right," he said, lowering his voice. "Tell me what you know." But before she could respond, a loud screech of tires echoed down the street. Lucas barely had time to react as a black SUV swerved onto the curb, heading straight for them. "Run!" the woman screamed, grabbing his arm and pulling him into the crowd. The SUV sped past, its windows blacked out, but Lucas could feel the weight of eyes on them. They darted through the streets, weaving between pedestrians, heart pounding in his chest. Whoever was behind the wheel was relentless and deadly serious. Finally, they ducked into a narrow alley, the sound of the SUV fading behind them. Lucas leaned against the brick wall, breathing heavily. The woman stood beside him, her face pale but determined. "Now do you believe me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Lucas nodded grimly. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to scare him anymore. They were out for blood. Lucas is now in deeper than ever. Can he trust this mysterious woman? Find out in the next chapter by subscribing and sharing. Chapter 4. The Hidden Agenda. Lucas brought the woman, who introduced herself as Emily Lawson, back to his apartment. It wasn't safe to talk anywhere public, and his office was likely compromised. As soon as they stepped inside, Lucas locked the door and drew the curtains. Every move felt like a precaution against unseen threats. "Start talking," he said, standing across from her in the small living room. Emily pulled off her scarf and glasses, revealing sharp features and piercing eyes. She looked exhausted, but focused. "Gale Industries. They've been laundering money for years. They own judges, politicians, police commissioners, you name it. Anyone who could stand in their way has either been bought off or disappeared." Lucas shook his head. "I've seen corruption before, but nothing on this scale." "How did you get involved?" "I was their inside counsel," Emily admitted, her voice dropping. "I handled deals, kept things clean on the surface. But when I started asking questions about some irregular transactions, I became a target." "Then why not go public?" "Because they have people everywhere," Emily said, her eyes wide with fear. "If I go to the authorities, they'll know. And I don't trust anyone in the system anymore. The only reason I'm still alive is because they don't think I'm a threat. Yet." Lucas paced the room, the weight of her words sinking in. If what she said was true, they were dealing with a criminal network far more dangerous than he had realized. The flash drive was just the tip of the iceberg. "So what do we do now?" Lucas asked, his voice heavy with frustration. "If we can't trust the law, who do we go to?" Emily hesitated. "There's someone, a journalist I used to work with, David Locke. He's been investigating Gale for years, but they've managed to keep him from getting too close. With what you have, he might finally have the ammunition he needs." "Why didn't you go to him first?" Lucas asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. "Because he's being watched, just like you." Emily glanced toward the window, as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. "If we're going to do this, we need to move fast and in secret. They won't give us a second chance." Lucas ran a hand through his hair, the pressure mounting. He knew they were playing a dangerous game. One wrong move and both of them could end up dead. But he couldn't back down now. "All right," Lucas said, grabbing his phone. "Let's set up a meeting with Locke. But we're going to be careful. No more surprises." Emily nodded, her face set with determination. "I'll make the call." As she dialed the number, Lucas moved to the window, peering through the curtains. The street below looked calm, but he knew better. They weren't safe. Not anymore. What will happen at the meeting with Locke? The stakes are rising. Subscribe and share to follow this intense thriller. Chapter 5. The Meeting. The dingy diner on the outskirts of town was the last place anyone would look for a high-stakes conversation. The smell of burnt coffee lingered in the air, mixing with the greasy scent of the fryers in the back. It was quiet, with only a few patrons scattered among the faded booths. Lucas and Emily sat in a corner, their backs to the wall, facing the entrance. David Locke was late. Lucas tapped his fingers on the table, his eyes flicking between the door and the street outside. Emily remained silent, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. The tension between them was palpable, both aware that at any moment, someone could walk in with a different agenda. Finally, the door creaked open, and a tall man with messy hair and tired eyes walked in. He spotted them immediately and made his way over, sliding into the booth across from them without a word. He looked even more worn down than Lucas had imagined. Years of chasing corruption had clearly taken its toll. "Locke." Lucas greeted him with a nod. Locke leaned back, sizing them up. His eyes lingered on Emily before turning to Lucas. "You better have something good, Donovan. I've been chasing these bastards for a long time, and I'm not in the mood for dead ends." Lucas pulled the flash drive from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table. "This is everything. Documents, transactions, offshore accounts. It's enough to bring Gale Industries crashing down." Locke stared at the small device, his face unreadable. "I've heard that before, but every time I get close, the evidence disappears and people go missing." His eyes locked onto Lucas's. "Why should I believe you're any different?" Before Lucas could respond, Emily spoke up, her voice sharp. "Because I was on the inside. I helped cover up their crimes for years. This isn't just speculation. This is the proof you've been looking for." Locke shifted in his seat, his interest piqued. "You're the whistleblower?" Emily nodded. "And if we don't act fast, they'll find out what we're planning. You've got to publish this. Now." Locke reached for the flash drive, but Lucas placed his hand over it, stopping him. "Not so fast," Lucas said, his voice low. "We need guarantees. Once this goes public, they'll come after us, and we can't just throw this out there without protection." Locke frowned. "What kind of protection are you talking about?" "Leverage," Lucas replied. "We need to release the story in stages. Drop just enough to keep them on their heels, but hold back the most damning evidence until we have a solid plan in place. We need time to disappear, or we'll end up in a ditch before this thing hits the news." Locke considered it, then slowly nodded. "All right, we play it your way. But I'm warning you, if I smell any kind of setup, I'll bury this faster than you can blink." Lucas lifted his hand from the flash drive, allowing Locke to take it. The journalist pocketed the device and stood up. "I'll be in touch, but don't get comfortable, you've kicked a hornet's nest. Gale won't go down without a fight." As Locke walked out of the diner, Lucas let out a slow breath. It had gone as well as could be expected, but now the real danger began. They were committed, and there was no turning back. Emily met Lucas's eyes, her face drawn. "Do you think he'll go through with it?" "He will," Lucas said, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. "He's got nothing left to lose." Just as they were about to leave, Lucas's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. He opened it and froze. "Nice try, Donovan. We're closer than you think." Emily noticed his reaction immediately. "What is it?" Lucas handed her the phone, and her face went pale. "They know," she whispered. Lucas's mind raced. How had they been found out so quickly? He glanced around the diner, suddenly feeling exposed. They needed to move. "Now, we're not safe here," Lucas said, grabbing his coat. "We have to disappear before they close in." As they rushed out of the diner, Lucas's heart pounded with the realization that time was running out. They had underestimated Gale Industries, and now it was only a matter of time before the hunters became the hunted. What will Lucas and Emily do next to stay one step ahead? If you're on the edge of your seat, subscribe and share to follow the thrilling chase. Chapter 6. The Escape. The night sky was thick with the threat of rain as Lucas and Emily hurried down a narrow alley, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. Every shadow felt like a threat, every passerby a potential enemy. Lucas's pulse raced, his mind working through 1,000 escape plans, none of which seemed foolproof. "They're closing in," Emily whispered, glancing behind them. "We need to get off the grid." Lucas nodded. "I know someone who can help." They ducked into a small, rundown hotel on the edge of the city, the kind of place where cash was king and questions were never asked. The lobby was deserted, except for a sleepy-looking clerk behind the counter who barely glanced at them as Lucas paid for a room. Once inside, Lucas locked the door and pulled the heavy curtains closed. The room was small and dingy, but it would have to do for now. "Who are we meeting?" Emily asked, sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. "An old contact from my early days in law," Lucas replied. He specializes in making people disappear. If anyone can keep us off the radar, it's him. Emily looked skeptical. And you trust him? As much as I can trust anyone right now. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, and Lucas tensed. He motioned for Emily to stay quiet, listening as the footsteps grew louder, then faded away. His nerves were fraying, and it was only a matter of time before Gale Industries found them. Hours passed, the tension in the room thick as they waited in silence. Finally, there was a soft knock at the door. Lucas checked the peephole and saw a familiar face. A tall, burly man with a gruff demeanor. "Frank," Lucas said, opening the door just enough to let him in. Frank stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. "You weren't kidding when you said you were in deep. What have you gotten yourself into?" "Donovan." "I don't have time to explain," Lucas said, handing Frank an envelope stuffed with cash. "We need to disappear. Can you do it?" Frank thumbed through the bills, then nodded. "I've got a place outside the city. Remote. No one will find you there unless you want to be found." Emily exhaled in relief, but Lucas wasn't so sure. Seemed too easy. He knew how dangerous Gale Industries was, and no matter how far they ran, there was always a chance they could be tracked. "How soon can we leave?" Lucas asked. "Now," Frank said, tossing a pair of fake IDs onto the bed. "Pack light. We need to move fast." Lucas grabbed his things, his mind spinning with everything that had happened. They were running, but how long could they keep this up? Gale's reach was vast, and they had resources far beyond what Lucas and Emily could muster. As they left the hotel, the rain finally began to fall, the droplets tapping against the pavement like the ticking of a clock. Time was running out. They drove in silence, the city lights fading behind them as they headed toward an uncertain future. Lucas knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The storm had only just begun. What will happen next as Lucas and Emily go into hiding? Don't miss the shocking twists in the final chapter. Subscribe and share to stay tuned. Chapter 7. The Trap. The cabin was nestled deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. It was small but secure, with thick wooden walls and only a single entrance. The air outside was cool, the silence of the forest broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves. As Lucas and Emily stepped inside, the isolation hit them like a weight. This was it, their last stand against the force that was Gale Industries. Frank had been true to his word. The cabin was stocked with supplies and even had a landline that Frank assured them couldn't be traced. But Lucas was wary. Trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. "We'll be safe here for now," Frank said, leaning against the doorway, arms crossed. "You've got everything you need. But remember, Gale has long arms. If they want to find you, they will." Lucas nodded, pacing the small room. "And what happens when they do?" "You've got two choices," Frank replied, his voice cold. "Fight or run. But if you run, you'll be running for the rest of your life." Emily sat on the edge of the bed, her face pale and drawn. "We can't keep running," she whispered. "We have to stop them, Lucas." Lucas paused, his mind racing. They had handed over the evidence to Locke, and the journalist was working on the story. But Gale Industries wasn't just going to sit back and wait for it to hit the news. They would make their move soon. And when they did, Lucas and Emily had to be ready. But something felt off. Lucas turned to Frank, narrowing his eyes. "Why are you helping us, Frank? This isn't your fight." Frank smirked, pushing off the doorframe. "You know me, Donovan. I don't pick sides. But I owed you a favor, and I don't like seeing good people get chewed up by the system. Just don't expect me to stick around when the bullets start flying." Lucas studied him for a long moment. Frank had always been a wild card, reliable when it suited him, but never without an angle. Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than Frank was letting on. After Frank left, the cabin felt even smaller, the quiet of the woods pressing in on them. Lucas sat down beside Emily, her eyes tired but determined. "We're close," she said softly. "Once Locke publishes the story, it'll all be over." Lucas wanted to believe her, But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. "We need a backup plan," he said. "Something in case Locke gets taken out before the story goes live." Emily nodded, pulling out her laptop. "I've still got the original files. We can send them to every major outlet in the country. Flood the media with it. They won't be able to silence everyone." "Do it," Lucas said, standing up. "And make sure you send it somewhere secure. We don't have much time." As Emily worked, Lucas walked to the window, staring out into the dark woods. The cabin was supposed to be safe, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Gale had already proven they were always one step ahead, and this place, remote as it was, felt like a trap. Suddenly, the landline rang, the shrill sound cutting through the stillness. Lucas and Emily exchanged a glance. No one should know they were here. Lucas picked up the receiver, his heart pounding. "Hello, Donovan." It was Locke, his voice tense. "I've got the story ready. We're going live in the next few hours. But you need to get out. Now." "What's going on?" Lucas demanded. "There's a leak," Locke said, his voice strained. "Gale knows where you are. They're coming for you, and they're not playing around this time. You've got maybe an hour, 2 at most. Get out while you still can." The line went dead. Lucas slammed the phone down, his mind racing. They had to move fast. "Emily, pack up. We're leaving." "What happened?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Locke says they're coming. We don't have much time." They scrambled to gather their things, but as they moved toward the door, the sound of tires crunching over gravel reached Lucas's ears. He froze, listening. It was too late. "Lucas!" Emily's voice was barely a whisper, her eyes wide with fear. Lucas peered through the small window, his blood running cold. 2 black SUVs were pulling up the driveway, their headlights cutting through the dark like knives. Men in suits stepped out, each one armed, moving with military precision. "They're here," Lucas muttered, his heart hammering in his chest. "We're trapped." Emily's face went pale. "What do we do?" Lucas scanned the room, his mind racing for an escape. There was no back door, no hidden exit. They were surrounded. His only option was to fight, but against this many men, it was suicide. "We need to hold them off," Lucas said, grabbing a chair and wedging it under the door handle. "Barricade the windows. Buy us some time." Emily nodded, her hands trembling as she grabbed anything she could to block the windows. But it wouldn't be enough. The men outside were professionals, and they were coming to end this, once and for all. The first gunshot shattered the silence, a warning shot that cracked through the night air. Lucas ducked as the front window exploded, glass raining down around them. "Get down!" he shouted, pulling Emily behind the overturned table. The door rattled as the men outside began to pound against it, their voices low and menacing. "Donovan, you can't run forever." Lucas's mind raced. They had only minutes, maybe seconds, before the door gave way. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and out of time. But he wasn't ready to give up. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking as he sent a final message to Locke. "They're here. Finish it." As the door splintered under the weight of the attackers, Lucas braced himself. This was the endgame. The only question was how it would play out. The door crashed open, and the men stormed in. But Lucas was ready. Will Lucas and Emily survive the final confrontation? The end. If you enjoyed our story, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications.